All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for staying with us this rainy morning here on Nantucket, and I hope the weather is better wherever you are. All right, Kristiana, I'm going to be introducing you. If you're there, if you turn your camera on, there you are. Yay! Excellent. So thrilled that you could join us today. Kristiana Ringer is a recent graduate of Elon University, where she was a double major in environmental and sustainability studies and international and global studies. And she was a graduate of Nantucket High School. She recently completed a community survey as an intern at the Nantucket Preservation Trust this summer to evaluate if an architectural salvage program would be beneficial to the Nantucket community. So we heard from Graham earlier this morning about the state of where things are, and now we'll be hearing from Kristiana a little bit more about where things could be and some next steps. So turning it over to Kristiana. Thank you.
Hi, Mary and everybody. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to start my presentation here. So yes, as Mary said, my name is Kristiana. I am from Nantucket. I grew up there, and I really think that growing up on Nantucket is kind of what sparked my interest in sustainability and environmental science, just because of the community and learning about how finite our resources actually are from living on an island. And so that is kind of what got me interested in environmental science and eventually led me to this internship with the Preservation Trust this summer. So yeah, let's get into it. First off, just to go over some, basic terms here. Architectural salvage is the focus of this presentation. I spent the summer talking to different members of the community and hearing what they had to say about the possibility of opening an architectural salvage yard on Nantucket, since currently there is no salvage yard and not necessarily an easy place to donate or get rid of building materials or household items that do still have the possibility of being reused or repurposed. And that's exactly what architectural salvage is. It's the reusing and repurposing of old building materials and new projects, no matter what they may be. So that can be anything from doors to historic mantelpieces to large appliances like washing machines, and even studs, 2x4s that could be reused in another building. So one major part of architectural salvage is deconstruction, and that is the process of disassembling buildings piece by piece and salvaging those reusable items. So you can take apart a building literally down to the studs and save what can be reused, either in its same form, taking a piece of wood and reusing it to build another house, or maybe if the wood isn't any good anymore, selling it to be recycled and turned into plywood. So there's so many different options and opportunities that people have been very creative with in terms of how we can really reduce the amount of waste specifically from building materials that is being generated currently. And there's a lot. I'm going to talk about more of that later, but I found it really interesting that almost 100% of the materials from a house can be reused or recycled. Things such as paint that I had no idea could be recycled, old paint. There's places that collect it and then turn it into new materials that give the paint a new life and really reduce the amount of waste that's ending up in our landfills and waste streams. So yeah, all of this contributes to what economists and sustainability scientists call the linear economy, which is basically what our current system in the US is. And that is the extraction of natural resources to make products, whatever that may be. The people then use those products and then they're disposed of. And it's a very linear system. It's not circular, which is the goal that a lot of people are trying to move towards today. A circular economy is much more sustainable. It really reduces and focuses on reducing the amount of waste and materials that are ending up in the waste stream, and thinking of creative ways to reuse them, repurpose them, and just overall keep waste down and be more sustainable. Something interesting that I was totally unaware of is that 45% of greenhouse gases come from producing everyday items that we use. So think cars, food, everything in your house. All of those items, the energy needed to produce those contributes to 45% of the carbon emissions that are causing greenhouse gases to cause climate change. The other 55% is energy production. So that means that 45% is really a area where we can make a huge difference if we are able to reduce our impact in that sphere. Another statistic is that 75% of municipal waste ends up being discarded, and 80% of that is burned, landfilled, or dumped just because of a lack of options when the consumer no longer needs that item. And that's sort of where architectural salvage comes in. It's really seen as, or at least I see it, as a really great solution or option for people to give their household products another life, another opportunity, and keeping all of those items and materials out of the landfill. So to make it a little more local, Nantucket is, as I'm sure you heard from Graham and the other presenters, is facing some issues right now. I was totally shocked when I learned about this. Almost 9,000 building permits were requested and granted in the last 5 years. That's about 1,800 building permits per year. Now, of course, these aren't all complete homes or anything like that, but these are still construction projects that are being built and require materials and resources, and they also contribute to a lot of the waste. So on construction sites, a lot of materials are over-purchased, over-ordered, what have you, and those excess materials or extra pieces that aren't necessarily used in the building end up in the landfill and aren't necessarily being reused or repurposed in other building projects in ways that they could be. Also, 305 demolition permits were issued in the last 5 years. That's about 61 per year. So all of those houses were just completely destroyed. None of the resources were salvaged. These weren't deconstructed houses. So that's another huge area where an architectural salvage yard could have a really big impact if there was a very visible alternative for these reusable resources to end up at instead. So as I'm sure Graham went over a bit in her presentation previously, the waste and recycling on Nantucket's a bit of a complicated process. It doesn't end when you take your trash can to the landfill on island. Most of the trash, especially the recycling, all of the recycling is shipped off island to Brockton, Mass, because the Nantucket landfill facility only has the capacity to deal with composting and household waste, not the recyclable part. Some of this recycling material is construction and demolition waste. Obviously, most of it is other types of recycling, but construction and demolition is still one big part of it. In the summer, about 3 trucks of recyclables are sent off per day, which is a huge quantity for a small island to be sending off every day. And separately, one entire truck that's only construction and demolition waste is sent off island, 1 truck per day, just about every day of the year. So that really speaks to the level of construction and demolition waste that we're producing on island, and also to the amount of impact that this type of project could have. So as Mary touched on earlier, I did conduct a community survey. I basically reached out to people from industries all over the island, from builders to the affordable housing groups to people involved in town government, to really better understand the situation on Nantucket in terms of what people's sentiments are about architectural salvage, what their concerns are, and in the hopes to create a proposal in terms to see what could possibly be done. I conducted a SWOT analysis and analyzed the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and I'm going to get into those now. So one of the biggest strengths that Nantucket has as a community is the culture of thriftiness and reuse that really inspired me to pursue sustainability studies. This culture goes all the way back to the beginning of Nantucket. I think mostly because it is an island, and so by nature we do have a limitation on the amount of resources that we do have available to us. And as a result, people are much more thrifty than they might be in other locations. For example, at the landfill several years back, they used to put all of the wood that could be reused out every Sunday morning, and community members would line up to go get all of that wood, and all of that wood was diverted from the landfill. Community members were able to take it for free. It was a fantastic community resource and really speaks to the level of interest by people who are looking for these more affordable and sustainable options for their own personal building projects. I also learned that Codfish Park in Sconset, the community down by the water, was completely built out of, originally it was completely built out of scrap lumber, and year-round residents would slowly, as they gathered the materials, take those materials out to Sconset and build their cottages by the water, which is something that isn't necessarily talked about, but is a very proud part of that community's history. Also, something that kept coming up in all of my conversations with people was the very large presence of the online exchange groups. So those would be, Facebook, the Facebook group Nantucket Consignments. Previously it was the online platform Reuse Exchange. Take It or Leave It, of course, comes to mind, as well as just a large number of thrift stores on the island that are really providing affordable options for year-round residents and summer residents alike, but mostly year-round residents who are looking to be sustainable or looking for affordable options, and this is what's available to them. Also, the builders' exchanges of materials are very popular, and lots of people really spoke to how well utilized they are. There are some shortcomings of this that I'll touch on later, but basically it's very common for builders to take materials that are destined for the landfill or aren't going to be used on a building project and take it home with them, maybe call up some friends, see if they're interested in taking those materials, maybe using it for themselves. Maybe the builders will try and resell these materials on the online platforms or just to people who they know who might be interested in anything from extra doors to old windows to extra wood, scrap lumber. So there really is a lot of sustainability already going on behind the scenes, but having a physical salvage yard on island could really be a strong way to have a central location for a lot of this to happen more out in the open as opposed to in a quiet way. Another really big strength of this project is the fact that the sustainability goals are central to the town's new strategic plan. Sustainability is one of the first words in their statement, and is basically underpinning the entire strategic plan in terms of how the town wants to plan for economic changes, social, demographic changes, and really ensuring that Nantucket will be able to continue functioning as it does now in the future. There are also specific goals to reduce the amount of waste in the landfill and just create ways to divert waste from ending up there. So this could definitely be a project that would help meet those goals. In terms of the existing need in market, this was a topic that was somewhat controversial because it's hard to know without having undertaken this project to know how popular it really will be. Most people who I spoke with felt very confident that there is a very strong existing need on island. Builders specifically, or people who are involved in the building industry, really spoke to how easy it was to share or sell the materials that they have. They say that their friends are always looking for extra lumber or specific pieces, and even their customers who might be building more expensive homes are also looking for special historic pieces that might come from another house on island that could be repurposed in their homes. So specialty items as well as more common goods are both in high demand, as well as the supply is also there. So as I've said, there is so much lumber and demolition going on island that these resources could be taken advantage of and be more visible to the public in a way that both reduces waste and also promotes reuse on island. One other benefit of encouraging deconstruction and salvaging is that it's very competitive with the cost of demolition. These are all estimates, but multiple people casually quoted to me it would be about $10,000 total to demolish a house and would be about the same to deconstruct it. It's very comparable, and I believe that if it was incentivized well, either with tax incentives at the town level or federal green tax incentives to really encourage deconstruction over demolition, I think a lot of waste could be diverted from the landfill and needs could be met with by the community. In terms of weaknesses, as I had mentioned, the question of supply and demand and the consumer base is one that kept coming up. There are a lot of concerns that there would be more supply than demand when you look at the number of houses that are being demolished and just the sheer quantity of construction happening on island. There's a lot, and many people are concerned that there wouldn't be enough demand by the community to take full advantage of this, which could lead to some issues with storage and just general management of the business. One major factor of that is that on Nantucket we have a limited consumer base. In some off-island salvage yards, people can travel from other states to go shop at their salvage yards, but that's not necessarily something that would happen on Nantucket, and so we're really constricted by the number of people who are here. It was also it was very clear when I spoke with the affordable housing groups that they would not be interested in using a salvage yard because they have completely shifted the way that they are constructing their houses, either using modular homes, meaning that the house is completely built off island and shipped in, which means they wouldn't necessarily need any lumber or salvage materials, or by accepting entire house donations that are then moved to the final location. So in terms of salvaged goods, they wouldn't be interested. Perhaps some appliance usage, or if the new tenants want to add on or something like that, that could be a potential consumer group. But in terms of affordable housing partnering with this project, they said that they were not interested. Another weakness is the just natural, unpredictable nature of the business. It's you literally can't predict what item is going to come through the door in the next hour. It could be anything from an old table to a small piece of wood from 1800. It's completely unpredictable. So that does make it very challenging to plan ahead, just from a practical standpoint. It's also challenging since there's not necessarily, while there are some previous salvage yards that were on island that we can learn from and learn from their mistakes and learn from what went well from them, there aren't necessarily a lot of communities like Nantucket that have done similar projects. So in terms of being able to compare to a community that has the same level of affluence and demographics as Nantucket and the limitations of being on an island, that would be something that Nantucket would have to really learn, take the charge with this type of endeavor. Another concern that was raised was competition from the existing exchange platforms, those being the builders selling materials from their construction sites or the online Facebook groups. These are obviously very popular groups, especially the Facebook groups. Nantucket Consignments has over 20,000 members in it, which is a huge number of people. And the ease of using these Facebook groups is so simple. You already have the item in your house, you take a picture of it, and then somebody comes and picks it up from you once they buy it. So that's something that definitely needs to be considered, and managing how you can transition from an entirely online platform to a more physical salvage yard if that is the route that the town decides to go with. There are, however, many opportunities for this project to be successful. Financially, it could be a really fantastic resource both for the town as well as homeowners and even construction companies and groups such as that. The town is obviously trying to reduce the cost and the amount of the quantity of waste that's going through the landfill, and so if these items are diverted from the landfill, that could reduce the costs for the town. And then for people and individuals, if this could be a fantastic alternative for people looking to do home building projects or just trying to construct something on a budget instead of going to an on-island lumber yard or hardware store, or even going off island to shop over there and then bring the items over themselves. It would depend greatly on how the salvage yard operates, though. So there are several kinds of ways that a salvage yard could be. It could be either completely donation based, meaning the owner of the item brings it to the salvage yard and they get a tax write-off for donating something to a nonprofit. Of course, that means that it would have to be a nonprofit. They get the tax write-off, and then the organization then has the opportunity to resell the item. Some salvage yards operate as the original owner will sell it to the salvage yard for a lower cost, and then the salvage yard will resell it at a higher price. Sometimes people do exchanges on credit. There's really a lot of ways that this could be taken. And those would have to be considered, especially when you take into consideration the popularity of the Facebook groups, where if people are trying to resell their items or sell their items, they are getting the full reimbursement for that. Whereas if it's a donation-based salvage yard, they wouldn't necessarily get the cash at that time for their item. So lots of things to consider there. A physical location is something that could have a lot of potential, physical as opposed to a virtual platform. It can foster creativity. People might see new uses in old items, and encourages people to really go to the physical location and see what's new, what has just come in, and really just create a following at a physical store as opposed to online. It's also significantly easier to publicize a physical store. There can be events, there can be marketing, propaganda, to really encourage people to go to the store and support the local business. One of the main things that was recommended for this physical location was putting it at the landfill, just to make it easier for everyone, but especially the contractors and builders, who would probably be the groups that are given the most items. They're already going to the landfill to drop off all of their demolition waste or excess lumber. And so stopping at the architectural salvage store to see if anything would be of interest for the salvage shop would not be a trip in the opposite direction. It would be much more streamlined for that. Also, the strongest opportunity, in my opinion at least, is the very strong interest by the community that's happening right now. Many people who I spoke with have been talking about this with other friends casually. It's really been a hot topic this summer and in the past year. And a lot of this interest is really coming back to a man named Greg Maringer. He's a local builder and salvager. He actually operated his own small deconstruction business and salvage business. And he really knows a lot about this topic, and has also expressed interest in being a part of it if it does come to fruition. He is very interested in carpentry education, as well as fix-it shops, and just has a really strong leadership presence and could be a very, very valuable asset for this program in the future. In terms of threats, there are several that were brought up many times. The big three being the cost of land, the cost of time, and the cost of labor. So when I was having these conversations with the different community members, there was a lot of very positive energy. People were really excited about the idea, but it all really came down to these three very practical concerns that they had that are not insignificant. I don't want to downplay these at all, because they're very practical matters. The first being the cost of land. Of course, the cost of land on Nantucket is extremely expensive, and this has been one of the main issues that has caused other salvage yards on island to close. It just didn't make sense from a financial standpoint to continue using the land as a salvage yard, because they were basically losing money. Even if there was some sort of philanthropic funding for this project, it would still require the business to be somewhat self-sufficient for it to even be a practical investment for the nonprofit organization, so that is definitely something that needs to be considered. One way that the salvage yard could keep costs down is by using the donation-based system. That is the least expensive option for the store that would allow them to maximize the amount of money that's being earned. But something else to keep in mind is that since it is salvage, it does take up a lot of space. You know, you might have 50 doors and some washing machines in there, and you would need about half an acre to an acre of land just to store all this stuff, as well as some sort of physical structure, maybe a repurposed garage or something like that, to store the more fragile items. So those all definitely are accumulated costs that must be taken into consideration. In terms of the cost of time, there's a sentiment among a lot of builders, not all, but some, that if an item has to be moved more than twice, it's probably not worth saving. If you start talking about architectural salvage with builders, it's very obvious that there's two sides of the line that builders will fall on. And there's some who believe in sustainability and are very actively trying to, be more green and sustainable, and there's others who are more traditional and really want to just get the project done and move on to the next project. And so this is definitely a threat that could come up in the future with builders and contractors that are just not interested in participating in a salvage yard or taking advantage of it either. Because salvage is not the easiest process, it will require more labor on all sides. That would mean more labor in terms of deconstruction as opposed to demolition, more labor to operate the salvage yard, and then also labor to retrofit items into the new house where they're going. So for example, if somebody picks up a bunch of cabinets for a kitchen at the salvage yard, they probably aren't going to fit perfectly into their home. So that will take a little more added effort and labor to make that retrofit work. There also was a call or a suggestion that this salvage yard is not volunteer run, that instead it has consistent employees and is operated like a proper business. Volunteers are fabulous, but they aren't necessarily the most sustainable option. And while it could keep costs down, that's not someplace where you would want to make that sort of compromise. Another issue is that a lot of the projects on Nantucket are on a very tight schedule. There is not necessarily a lot of extra time allotted into construction projects, and a lot of homeowners want their project done as quickly as possible, no matter what it takes. So deconstruction, while it is very quick when considering what you're doing and the work that's going into it, it still would take maybe 2 weeks longer or a week and a half longer than it would to just demolish the building in one day. So that is something that does need to be considered, and some homeowners might not be interested in taking that extra time to save and reuse all those materials from the building. Another concern that came up time and again for a variety of reasons is the quality of materials that are actually being salvaged and donated to the salvage yard. On one hand, there's concerns about these old items that won't meet new building codes. For example, old windows won't meet new building codes for hurricane windows. There's a lot of restrictions on island about that, and just other codes that older materials might not match up to. Also, just the idea that not everything that can be salvaged should be salvaged. We don't have to save everything, because there really are some materials that would just take up more space in a salvage yard than it would be worth. So that is something that a person with a certain amount of knowledge about building and carpentry would really need to be regulating at the salvage yard, just to ensure that it doesn't become a dumping ground for everything that has ever come out of a house. This could especially become an issue if contractors and demolition companies are using salvage yard as a way to avoid the high dumping fees for construction and demolition waste. This is an issue that the take it or leave it has run into. People will drop off and donate their items, whether they be half broken, fully broken, whatever, as a way to, feel good about, okay, like I didn't throw it away, I donated it. But then 3 days later, the town has to come through and they're the ones who are absorbing the costs for clearing out the take it or leave it every once in a while. And it becomes problematic. And in terms of construction and demolition fees, those are significant. And so if the salvage yard is seen as a scapegoat for that, that could become problematic and really doesn't address one of the main goals of this project, which is to help the town and help the landfill reduce their costs and reduce their waste. Oh, forgot one point there. One other threat of this project that I've kind of touched on several times is the voluntary nature of it. While this might not seem like a threat, it could become challenging if people and contractors especially are not necessarily willing to go that extra step to actually participate in it. And a salvage yard does require a certain amount of supply to even open. You need a selection because it's the type of business where people will come in and look through everything and be inspired by what they see there. So just having one or two of each item would not be sufficient. So in terms of potential ways forward for this project, these 4 ideas are really the culmination of all of my conversations with the 15 different community members who I met with. I kind of took different parts of conversations that we had and came up with these 4 ideas. The main one and most popular one by far is having an actual physical salvage yard on island. There was significant support for that. The practical concerns that were raised by people are not anything that is insurmountable. And if there was some sort of public nonprofit partnership, this could really become, or a lot of those concerns, especially with cost of operation, would not necessarily be relevant with a nonprofit underwriting it. This option also has the huge benefit of gaining the publicity of being a town operation. So a town project will just have so much more visibility than a nonprofit or for-profit operation that is only working on its own. And that visibility is very, very necessary for this project to be successful. Several of the salvage yards on island closed because they just didn't have enough publicity and people didn't know that they even existed. There's been several that were somewhat successful, but they just couldn't get the word out far enough for it to actually make sense for them to keep going. Also, this nonprofit partnership would be essential because a salvage yard, considering the cost of land and labor, would probably not be it would probably be a break-even business and probably not be making a lot of profit at all, which really means that the efforts and energy behind it needs to come from the goodwill of the people and a community-wide effort to have this as a community resource as opposed to a profitable business venture. There's probably a need for 2 or 3 employees, maybe a deconstruction crew. I'll get into more of that later, as well as storage space. So there are a lot of things to be considered here, but if the town is able to work with a nonprofit and kind of shape that into using the benefits of both to maximize the potential for this project, I do think that could be a very successful option. Another aspect of this could be to use or to partner with a salvage yard off island, maybe Habitat for Humanity. They operate very large restores where they resell architectural salvage as well as household furniture, and all of the money earned from there benefits their organization. So partnering with a store on the Cape, there's 2, and sending excess items that might be on Nantucket just due to that oversupply and not enough demand. And people suggested that we could use dead loads potentially, so empty trucks that are going off island, just fill them up with all these items and not necessarily have to pay to ship more items off island. Obviously that's something that would have to be looked into a little further. Excuse me. Another option that was suggested was, instead of putting all of our efforts into a physical salvage yard, instead focusing on enhancing the online platforms. So this would look one of 2 ways: either really putting a lot of effort into advertising and encouraging the online platforms, maybe having some campaigns island-wide that are talking about sustainability and waste reduction and ways that people can do that, either through donating items to thrift stores or reselling them online, or retrofitting their own items, or it could look like hiring somebody as a middleman to take items from houses that are being deconstructed, or just building sites or people's homes where they have items that they don't know what to do with, and then reselling them on this online platform. Of course, that does run into issues of storage space, so this middleman probably would need some sort of storage space to store the items short term before they're resold, because of course not everything is going to be sold immediately. So there are some issues to work out there, but I thought it was a very interesting idea in terms of taking something that's already working great and just taking it that one step further. There used to be the reuse exchange platform on Nantucket. It was basically eBay for Nantucket only, and that was extremely popular for about 10 years, but recently it kind of fell out of use with the rise of the Facebook group. And the owner of that platform really spoke to the power of being able to just directly meet the buyer and the seller and not necessarily needing to deal with anything in between. It was just very simple and straightforward. So that's another option. In terms of the third one, discouraging demolition and encouraging deconstruction instead, people visualize this as a policy or a social movement across the island, policy being maybe making it harder legally or permit-wise to actually demolish a building, while making it easier to deconstruct one. So just small things like that could be, on a grand scale, have some impact in terms of the amount of demolition happening. And then socially, there's talk of doing social media campaigns, art around town, using architectural salvage, speaking with the Builders Association as well as the public to really encourage deconstruction as a more sustainable option that is meeting the goals of the town and the town's strategic plan. And then also really emphasizing the actual and global costs of deconstruction As I said previously, it's basically the same cost to demolish or deconstruct. And so there is a lot of potential there to really encourage deconstruction as a more favorable option if the right measures are taken. There also the potential leadership that I was speaking about previously with Greg Maringer. He also said he might be interested in having a deconstruction crew where a group of maybe 10 people would go to a house and deconstruct it piece by piece. And then all of those salvaged items could be resold in the salvage shop. So there is also potential there to have, a small business on island of a group that you can hire to go deconstruct your house, and then it would all be dealt with seamlessly, straight from your house to the salvage yard. Also, another alley that I had not considered until I spoke with Val Oliver, who is a member of the HDC and is also a local architect, is the issues that come with moving houses. So Nantucket is kind of unique in that we are able to move a lot of houses around the island, and they're given second chances at life. But the process for actually getting the permits to move a house that somebody is that the original owner is looking to demolish is very challenging. It's extremely inefficient, in her opinion, and really limits the potential for house movement to be a real option for people to do. So basically, in a timeline, if the owner of a house decides that they want to demolish the house and a potential buyer expresses interest in it, the amount of time that they have to get a permit is so short that the house usually ends up being demolished anyway. This is a huge amount of waste for the island, especially in a town where affordable housing is such a large issue. A lot of these demolished houses could potentially become affordable housing for people. Housing Nantucket does a great job with that, with accepting full house donations and then reselling them as affordable houses for families in need. And so Val Oliver's suggestion is creating a landing space for these houses to be moved temporarily while the new owner sorts out all the legal permits and paperwork and buying of the house. And then the house is moved from that landing space to the final location. She thinks that this could really decrease a lot of waste and demolitions that are happening on island for no reason. There's expressed interest from a buyer, but the house ends up being demolished anyway. So definitely a lot of waste, but also a lot of opportunities for change here. So thank you so much for listening. As I'm sure you felt through the presentation, there is a lot of positive energy behind this project and a lot of really strong interest on island. So hopefully it really can come to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristiana. Kristiana and I first met many years ago when I was working at another job when we were moving furniture. We did a lot of yard sales as a fundraiser for that organization. So it's interesting that we were salvaging furniture on the weekends, and now here we are talking about salvaging an entire house and how that reuse can relate. And I think it's really, it was great to listen to you and to think about somebody who's grown up on the island and sees some of the issues here, understands them, and wants to work to make that change happen. And I think that you should be really proud of the work that you accomplished, and we will all be able to say we knew you when someday. One of the things that kind of, I think your last point was one that was really resonant to me and to anybody who's been watching the ways in which houses are demolished on Nantucket, and to folks who are tuning in from other places or maybe aren't necessarily as familiar with this topic, is that even though that Nantucket is not only a national historic landmark, but the whole island's a local historic district. And so that means that any change to the exterior of a house or any house coming up or down has to be approved. So it's surprising sometimes to find that there is this much demolition. And Kristiana brought up the idea of a timeline and how that is driving so many of these decisions. And a lot of that is money behind it, right? People wanting to get in, chasing a construction schedule, a house that somebody might want to be able to repurpose, but is not able to get all the permits in order in time. Nantucket doesn't have a demolition delay ordinance. There's a 30-day delay for any structure that could be moved if it could be reused for housing, but 30 days is almost nothing in the scope of things out here. Look at how long the Historic District Commission's application or agenda is from week to week. So that's why, it's interesting to think about other communities where they do have longer delay ordinances specifically for historic structures. So it's like all the pieces are there. We just need to find a way to make them line up properly. And, we've got a couple questions. Great. Mary Longacre says one idea might be to somehow tax any furniture purchased new and brought to the island, whether sold at a local store or purchased from off-island sellers, and not tax locally created furniture or used furniture sales. It's interesting. Another question from Michelle. Curious to know whether in your conversations with the community, if people were talking about the increasing cost of new lumber, particularly given the reoccurring widespread wildfires that have impacted the lumber industry. This factor seems like it could weigh heavily in favor of salvage yards' existence here, especially from the perspective of the smaller caretaker construction building projects when homeowners are not able to get contractor discounts for large scale purchasing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's not necessarily specifically one that came up in terms of the increasing cost of lumber as a result of wildfires, but the cost of lumber specifically at Island Lumber and Marine Home Center was really brought up as a barrier for a lot of island families to be able to fund their own individual projects. So a lot of locals will want to add on additions to their houses or build a shed or whatever it may be. But they do it themselves because they can and because it's so much more affordable. The cost of living here is astronomical. And so having an affordable lumber source for locals was really something that kept coming up again and again. Another point that I thought was interesting was that a lot of people felt strongly about the need to market or portray, or however you want to say it, the salvage yard as a community resource as opposed to a alternative shopping option for summer residents. While that might not seem like a huge distinction, it really was something that a lot of people were really concerned about because there are many spaces on island that aren't necessarily positioned as community resources for the year-round community. And as a result, they are often gentrified is really the only word that I can think of for the summer residents, and the community kind of loses that resource. And so that was another point that was brought up.
Yeah, that's very interesting, the idea of people being able to having the skills to do the work, but the financial cost of the new material is so high. That's why I don't have an outdoor shower yet. Tim asks, in your research, have you found programs elsewhere in the country that can be models to help understand the financial supply, demand, and et cetera? I know we're talking a little bit about this.
Yeah, so it was very hard to find comparable salvage yards. A lot of the salvage yards off island, and especially the ones that had an online presence, which was really the only way that I could learn anything, were much more like upscale vintage furniture stores. They'd be the types of places where you might find, you know, an old president's desk or something. Like they're just completely different market than what we would be doing here on island. Also, just given the limitations and characteristics of Nantucket as an island, it wasn't. I couldn't find anything. I did find a couple salvage yards that seemed similar, but again, like it was the socio-demographic factor was just completely different than Nantucket, which I think is a very important factor to consider. So,
Really.
the research is needed.
Yeah, and I would say too, yeah, that if people have places that they've been to or they've seen that you think would be great for Nantucket, as Graham mentioned earlier, yeah, thanks in large part to Kristiana's work this summer, NPT is starting to remain Nantucket about doing a larger scale survey to see how would we get all these things to work together, and working with WPI, Worcester Polytechnical Institute students, excuse me, this fall. So that'll be really, or winter, that'll be exciting. And Sean, who we'll be hearing from later this afternoon, and I'm so excited to hear more about what's happening in Portland, mentions that in Oregon and Washington, the building codes have changed to allow salvaged lumber in new construction if it's, you know, structurally sound. So that is, and you know, I think what we're seeing is there's all these things, these initiatives that you can do, that an individual can do, and then policy needs to be shaped around that in order to make sure that these things happen. Will says, are there any particular circular construction public-private partnerships that Nantucket can learn from? I'm not sure.
I am not sure in terms of specific ones.
Yeah, I think that'll be definitely, that's a good thing to bring up, Sean, and something to think about as we go on this larger scale feasibility study. I think definitely a reminder too, and why I'm so looking forward to this afternoon and hearing from some, you know, I think we've got a good idea of like, what's the 30,000 foot view on Nantucket? What are the issues? Where could we go next? And then to hear from some communities who are, you know, years and in some cases light years ahead of us, and to see what they've done. Nantucket, we say that an expert is somebody who comes from 30 miles away. So these folks will be coming from even further than that. And so I think we've got to break for lunch. For our afternoon session, it's a different link to click on. It's a different Zoom link. So check your emails again, and you'll want to click on the 1 p.m. session. If you click on this one, we won't be here. We'll be over in the other one. But I wanted to thank Kristiana, to thank Graham, and to thank Nathaniel for this morning's sessions, and looking forward to seeing all of you and more this afternoon. All right. Thanks, everyone.